Hello, welcome to LitFest Online. I'm Lucy Popescu, chair of the Authors Club. And we set up this literary festival really to help writers who had books coming out during the lockdown. Tim Finch, for example, his second novel, Peace Talks, came out on April 16th. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, thanks for having me.
In Peace Talks, a Norwegian diplomat is coming to terms with the loss of his English wife while chairing high-profile talks in a mountain resort in Austria. As he facilitates sessions between the two warring sides, Edvard reflects on his past with Anna and tries to find some inner calm. Tim, what inspired Peace Talks?
Well, first of all, Sebastian Barry, the Irish writer, said recently that no one has an idea for a novel, or if they do, they should go away and get drunk and forget about it. And I sort of agree with that in the sense that I think that, the big concept novel or trying to tackle an issue, that's not the sort of writing I'm interested in writing or reading. So it didn't come as sort of some big philosophical idea. I think more like most writers, it was a few little elements were there from the beginning. The title was there quite early. And there was this notion of a man dealing with trying to find peace at a macro level in bringing peace to a terrible conflict, and then also struggling with an inner conflict, and how did he come to peace with himself, if you like. So it was the swing between those two things which was the original inspiration for me.
And I love your central tenet that peace negotiations are like psychiatric counsellors. They both have to listen, bite back their opinions, and are largely silent. Why did you want to write about this?
Well, that is a really interesting question, because when I submitted the book for consideration by publishers, and it was accepted by Bloomsbury, the editor there, Alexandra Pringle, said she thought most of the book was absolutely fine and didn't need a lot of editing. But one thing she did suggest was that to bring out more the element of him having psychiatric counselling and a figure that sort of chimes in his head every now and again. So that was actually quite a late addition. And goes, I think, to point to the way that writing works. It is largely the sole work of one person, but editors are important, and even if they don't edit the book within an inch of its life, they can come up with something that can be really, really important. And so that element came in, and I agree with you. I mean, it's sort of almost serendipitous in the sense that it was suggested by someone else, but it fits in well, doesn't it? That idea that Edvard is such a sort of cool, calm customer on the whole, but sometimes he's very volatile, and obviously when he suffers the terrible bereavement that he does, he goes into some counselling. It's very much against his instincts and the type of personality he is, but he does find some peace, and in a way, his counsellor Caroline is playing the role that he's playing at the Peace Talks, which is sort of sucking all this stuff up and allowing him to, them to let it all out, so that in the end, some resolution is reached.
And how does your long-term work with and on behalf of refugees, I'm thinking of the Refugee Council, Welcome Refugees, influence the book's tone? For example, you describe a scene where the couple host a refugee for 2 months and are hugely relieved when he leaves and they get their own space back. They triple their donation to a refugee organisation to assuage their guilt. But why did you include this scene?
Well, the book, first of all, my first novel, A House of Journalists, was directly about refugees, and so very much drew on my working experience for the last 20 odd years or so. Although sort of tangentially, obviously, no book is a sort of write directly out of experiences you've had. This one is not about that as such, but it's about a person trying to do good in the world, which I guess is what people who work on refugee issues, as I did, was trying to do. There was an injustice, human rights abuses, the way the world treats refugees is not very good. You'd like to see it treated better. But I have always been uncomfortable with the notion that people who work with refugees are somehow sort of innately better than people who work in, I don't know, banks or supermarkets or what have you. My experience is that, they're a mixed bag. Most of them are lovely, but some of them are not, and there's very mixed motives for working on this issue. And so I, in a sense, I drew a little bit of that, and largely, I should say, myself, in that, it doesn't follow that because you're doing a good thing in the world that you are sort of good all the time. You can at times be a bit of an shit, and on the whole, I don't think that, I think that Edvard is a good man, and Anna's a good woman, his wife. But they decided they would do that great thing that amazing people do, which is welcome a refugee into their own home, and then they just found they hated the experience and couldn't wait for the poor refugee guy to leave. And in the end, they start dancing around their kitchen when he eventually does leave. And I wanted to it was partly to suggest that because you do a good thing, you can do things that are sort of a bit wicked. But I also have to say that I think it's a wonderful thing to invite a refugee into your own home and provide them with somewhere to live. But I don't think it's particularly bad if you are the type of person who doesn't want to do that. And I should add, I've worked in the refugee world for many years, and I know there are lots of refugees homeless. I've got a spare room in my house, and I've never had a refugee sleep here. That's partly my my own disposition as well.
But they are essentially good people. And I wonder if you think we'll see a resurgence of good, decent people like Edvard when we come out of this pandemic. Do you believe the aftermath of COVID-19 will change or affect peace negotiations in the future? And if so, how?
On the whole, I'm a pessimist, I think, in that regard. I don't think in the long term that we change all that much. I think there is progress in the world, but it's very discontinuous and it's very incremental. And I think the sort of notion that some people are clinging on to, that somehow because we've had this very bad thing, good things might come out of it, is something we're whistling to keep our spirits up, quite frankly. So I don't think that, and I think you can slightly tell that by the way we've handled the pandemic. It has, in a way, been every man for himself in terms of how nations have dealt with it. And so I think, there might be things like the utter incompetence with which Donald Trump has handled it in America might contribute to him losing the election, and that would be good for the world. But I don't sort of feel there'll be, in some way our souls will be bathed and will emerge from this much better people than we are now. In fact, I think if anything, there'll be a bit of a sort of, we'll all party vigorously after it's all over. So no, I'm not generally a great pessimist about things, but I don't subscribe to that notion that somehow something's going to massively change in the international spirit, I'm afraid.
And you write poignantly about bereavement, and it really did make me feel that this must come from personal experience, but because you just write so well about it. But how does one write about grief and loss without turning off a reader? Did you have to leaven your poignant story with humour?
Well, on the last part, I have done that. So the book, although the way it's been, we've talked about it so far, and your brilliant little précis at the beginning suggests a book that's sort of sad and indeed perhaps a bit grueling. And there is a bit of that, quite a lot of that. That's the major tone of the book. There are sort of light-hearted episodes because I think that's what life's like. Just think, now in the midst of this misery and fear, there's a lot of laughter and people making light of it and making fun of it, and there's absurdity and joy as well. So there is in his life, and there is, generally there's some sort of jokey bits in the book. As for personal experience of bereavement, I am incredibly lucky. I'm 57 now, and I really haven't had a serious bereavement in my whole life, which is, somewhat remarkable. Obviously I know people who have died, but I just think that, you can just, if you've loved anyone, particularly for any length of time, if you just imagine what it would be like if they suddenly weren't there, I don't think you have to have had that experience to be able to plumb the depths of it imaginatively, and that's sort of what I did. I should add that one of the minor inspirations for it, I wouldn't overstate this, is that I don't know him very well, but I know professionally a little bit Brendan Cox, who was the husband of Joe Cox, the Labour MP who was, shockingly murdered. And obviously that was a profound shock to anybody who knew him, and I knew her a little bit. And so that element, the more shocking element of the book, and I realise I'm giving away a bit here, spoiler alert, it was inspired. But I've never talked to Brendan about that. I don't know him well enough to do so.
Well, that actually does lead on very well to my next question, which is, why did you decide to make, and this is a spoiler alert, but I mean, it comes, we find out about this quite soon in the book. Why did you decide to make Anna's death a violent one?
Well, as I say, partly there was that in the period when I was writing the book, that terrible thing happened, which we all remember from 2016. So I think consciously a bit, but also subconsciously, that must have influenced it, because I knew right from the start that you'd realise that Edvard was talking to someone who was absent. At the beginning, it might be that she's just not there because he's away from home, and then it emerges that she's dead, and then how is she going to die? And her death does come as a shock. So it's partly that. I think there was, just in a sense, this sounds a bit cynical, but in any book has to have a bit of light and shade and drama. So I made it shocking because I wanted to shock the reader a bit and just have a moment. But it wasn't just that. I think there was a strong element in that the major tone and atmosphere of the book is one of sort of quiet. It's a sort of elegiac type of book, and I wanted to have a bit where it suddenly speeds up. So there's the moment when Anna dies, and indeed there's the aftermath of her death, which in many ways is very shocking as well. Those bits are sort of, it's pell-mell, so the style changes a lot. It's very fast. Everything is chucked at it. There's plot twists and things going on left, right, and centre. Whereas in most of the rest of the book, not an awful lot happens. Quite frankly, you're dwelling on one man's innermost thoughts. So it was partly about how the story and the characters developed, and it was partly sort of narrative technique, if you like. Get a bit technical.
But it also fits in very well with that kind of public personal theme, because it also means that Edvard's grieving becomes a public thing, a very personal, private thing that comes out there in the public, because everyone knows how his wife died. So I think it really does fit your theme really well, to have it done like that. I see you're in your shed, which I presume is your writing shed. So I do want to ask a quick question about your writing process, your writing routine, and how long it took you to complete the book.
Well, yeah, no, I am in my writing shed. It makes me sound like David Cameron, so I feel a bit wary of it. But I am lucky enough to have a garden big enough to have a shed in it, and in that shed is where I have done the writing of this book very largely. The process. One thing I think that's sort of interesting is that unless you have unless your first book is a huge hit, there's no real guarantee that your second book is going to be accepted by anyone. I think this comes a bit of a shock. I think people who are unpublished think, well, once you've cracked publication once, you're good for the next 5 or 6 novels, unless they're absolute turkeys. But it's not the case anymore that because you had one book published, that people are going to like the second one. And I wrote a book which actually I quite enjoyed, but my agent absolutely hated and sort of advised me not to pass on to publishers. And I took her advice. I'm glad I did, because she knows the business a lot better than I did. So all that's a long way of saying is I sort of, in a sense, slightly wasted 2 years on a book where nothing came of it, or not in the short term anyway. And actually, I wrote Peace Talks relatively quickly. It's quite a short book. It's only about 200 pages. And once I'd got into it, I was able to write at relative speed. My technique for writing, which I think is pretty much everybody's technique for writing, is to write little splurges. I mean, you get little moments where everything seems to come right, but even then, if I have a splurge, I stop and go back because I'm suspicious of why I've had a splurge. And so it's a constant process of writing, rewriting. I mean, I worry over every single word.
And but you're quite a busy man, so when is your best time to write, or do you just have to fit it in when you can around other work?
Yes, I mean that's the answer really. Until very recently, I have had full-time jobs that are more than full-time and lots of other things. So I just write when I can really. I mean, you can find time. There are actually plenty of hours in the day to write. It's not so much the actual amount of physical time there is. It's that I just find it quite difficult to move from the mindset of working on something. And in most of the time I've been working quite a senior level. So I'm not just worrying about my own job, but about the future of the organisation. And it can be, you sit down and it takes you an hour or two before you can even get that out of your mind and start writing again. So, in a strange way, I find it sort of miraculous that I have found the time. But I suppose if you're determined enough, then you do. And it's sort of all I do. It's my only hobby, really.
And what are you working on next? Do you have another book in the pipeline?
I do actually, and more recently, I went into self-isolation 2 months earlier than everybody else because I'd sort of given myself a sabbatical. So I'm not on an official sabbatical. I just decided to stop, working on other things and just spend some time writing, which is, now I think about it, a tremendous piece of good luck, because I think it would have been very hard to start writing something. And from what I can gather from social media, lots of writers are really struggling. They've got the time and the atmosphere, you might be right, but so there's something about the times that makes getting on with a book difficult. I haven't had that problem because I'd already started. And so this has been, in the very narrow sense of being able to devote time writing, a really blissful and productive period for me. I'm really motoring on with a new book. As to what it's about, I sort of feel as though that really tempts fate. Really, it's about something or other, and a little bit different, but something of the same tone of Peace Talks in some ways. But I'm getting on with it, so I'm hopeful I might be able to submit that relatively soon.
Great, and let's finish off with a short reading, if we may. And I'm going to put myself on mute because I can hear someone drilling in the background, and I don't want to disturb your reading. But I'll come back when you've finished. But take it away. Okay, well, this is a little section from right near the beginning of the book, and it's just where Edvard notices that one of the parties to the peace negotiations is reading the Thomas Mann novel, Magic Mountain. He's reading it in Arabic, though. To return to the Magic Mountain for a moment, at some point, bringing it up, I couldn't help noticing, might help with the negotiator in question. Little somethings like this sometimes do. Though the fact that he speaks English so beautifully, so pointedly, gives me pause. Is he signalling something through his choice of reading? And if so, what? Such minefields, darling, I can hear you saying. Having got into our stride across the snowfield, we have to exercise caution on a small wooden bridge, as the planks can be treacherously icy. The bridge crosses a mountain torrent, though for most of the weeks we have spent here, its leaps and limbs have been startlingly frozen, as if by the tap of a winter witch's wand. And let me withdraw the as if straight away. That rushing water can be so astonished into stillness is surely a sign of magic at work, and not the agency of ice. Though such is the way of things, the path then takes us straight into a rectilinear stand of pines with no magic about it at all. The trees are numbered and smell of the saw shed and the timber merchant. And next we cross a tarmac road, and outside a row of modern chalets stand BMWs and Volkswagens with skis and snowboards on their roof racks. But that is the last of that. Thereafter, the walk takes us away from the glitter of the resort into more ragged pine and fir forest, to one of the steeper, rockier climbs, until in due course we emerge above the tree line of the mountain and are rewarded with a stupendous panorama of peaks. The thin ice air scintillates our lungs and thrills our faces. The sky is a filled-in blue, the only powder in the wash, the dissolving evidence of an airliner at its most ethereal. Chief, someone says, clapping me on the back with a big bear paw. Yes, I say, the spell must be broken. Some view, isn't it? As I say. My ever-presence among the walking party, I've not missed a bay, does not, I trust, inhibit camaraderie. On mornings when we have been in higher spirits, I've joined in the snowball fights and taken my turn on the metal tray, swiped from behind the bar by a grade 7,
My tumbling from that tray into a hollow of deep powder provoked much hilarity, yet it's true to say that I tend not to be part of the huddles that form and disperse, that chat and laugh together as we make our way up the mountain. I tend to hang back a bit or stride ahead, absorbed in my own thoughts. And of course one must be conscious to some degree of one's station, one's position, even muffled up on the mountain. A certain distance must always be maintained. I'm making you laugh, I can tell. Well, good, because don't think for a moment I'm in low spirits, that I'm lonely, though of course I miss you constantly.
Great, thank you very much. It's a really poignant read. I urge you to buy it, everyone. Books are still available online via indie bookshops, so doing some deliveries, so look out for it. Thank you very much, Tim, and good luck with the rest of the promotion for the book.
Thank you very much, Lucy.